Hey guys, I'm going to go ahead and run a tutorial using the frequency separation technique. The benefit of using the frequency separation technique is that it keeps the tones and color in one layer and the texture in another, and you can make changes and edits to each one respectively without contaminating the other, as you might with just using a healing brush. Alright, let's go begin, and we're going to work on the hair and makeup and all the other stuff a little later. But first we're going to go ahead and do this. Alright, you're going to start off with the original background layer. You first have to make sure that the image is 16-bit for this to work, RGB color mode, and what we're going to do is hit Command Control J, Command on a Mac, Control J on a PC twice. We want to duplicate the original background layer. We want to use the middle layer is going to be the tones, also known as the low frequency. So we can change it to change the name of the layer to low tones. And the top layer is going to be the high and the texture layer. Alright. These are going to be the two layers that we're going to work on mostly with the skin. What I like to do there is then group the two layers and name this retouch. And when you do that, you'll be able to easily compare the progression of the editing by selecting the one layer on and off. Obviously nothing's changing because we haven't made any changes. Alright, so let's start. We're going to go ahead and deselect the high texture layer, select the low tones. What we want to do here, there's a couple different ways that people do this. One way is to use a Gaussian blur, another way is to use a surface blur. I like using dust and scratches, and the reason that is because what we want to do ultimately is you want to smooth out the tones in this, again the low tones. You want to smooth out the tones in this so you lose any of the detail of the skin, obviously, but the tones themselves, the color tones themselves, start blending into one. And the reason the dust and scratches works better than most of the other filters is because it does maintain edges rather sharply, and it doesn't contaminate the color when you start going in editing for tones. So what we want to do here is you want to select a high enough radius that the tones start blending into themselves. Obviously there's going to be a huge difference between several different tones, so you don't want to worry about that right now, but you want to look out for spots like, say, here in the forehead and in the nose and the cheek, mostly tones like this. So you really want to find the right amount, not too much and not too little, because you could always go back to that. I thought 25, 26 is a good amount. And the threshold obviously 0, because if you obviously start changing around with that, it starts sharpening the image back up, and we really don't want that. We want to use the full benefit of using the dust and scratches filter. Okay, so you want to just go ahead and OK that. And it's really, the number's really going to depend on the size and the resolution of your image. Alright, so now we're going back to the high texture layer, and we're going to go ahead and unhide that again. What we want to do, and the reason the image has to be at RGB 16 is because we're going to go to Image, Apply Image, and for the layer you want to select the low tones layer because you want this to affect that directly. So low tones, and here in this area here, blending, you want to change it to Add. Scale is going to be 2. 0 offset, all this. Preserve transparency and mask, stay unchecked. You want to invert. Now it does look like a high pass filter, but it technically is not. And then you want to OK that. Now you obviously see that the image itself is has been changed. So the layer mode here, you want to change to linear light. That's basically going to put back your image the way oops, sorry, using a Wacom tablet here, the way it looked originally. And now we can start working with our editing. Now, there's a couple different ways that we could start doing this. I like to zoom in. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of blemishes in this particular image that I found online, and I'll put the link to where you can find this particular image to practice with in the description or on the page itself. You can see this model particularly has not the best skin, but it's a good candidate for this tutorial, and you're going to see a huge difference in what we're going to be doing with it. Now, one of the things that is beneficial to doing it in this sense is obviously, again, you could work on the high texture, and that's the layer you're going to work with the blemishes and the texture, and here you're going to work again with the tones and the tonality of the image. Now, one of the things that I like to do is particularly go into some of these adjustment layers and add adjustments to it so you can see better the blemishes that will appear, because obviously you saw that it's very difficult to see some of these blemishes, where if I go into the black and white adjustments panel and remove the reds, you can see some of the tones that are starting to show up a little, some of the blemishes that are starting to show up a little better, and ultimately we're not letting the color contaminate what our goal is, and that is texture. That is pretty scary. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is using a curves adjustment panel and doing like a solarized effect, and that really helps with the tones in a little bit, and you'll see what I mean here. So it's just a few seconds here. Just want to get it up and down, and you want to make sure that it doesn't hit all the way to the top. And you get a nice, a nice smooth turn. It's always a little tricky to do this with a Wacom tablet. Now, this technique can be done on a using a mouse, not so much a mouse pad, a trackpad, but I'm using a Wacom tablet. Wacom does offer the most flexibility when you want to get in there and do some really minutia detail, and that will work for now. Alright, so obviously you can see that there's a lot of difference in the tone range. So what I'll do too here is do another curves adjustment. Take the black, go all the way up, and I could call this desat. As for desaturation, call this a solar. It's always good to name your layers so when you refer to them you know exactly what it is you're looking at. And the black and white, of course. Now, all three of them used at the same time, you're going to get different effects. And for certain parts of this tutorial you'll be able to do that, but for others it really will probably get in the way. Now what I'll do is select all three of these, Shift and Command G, group them. You can call this anything you want, help, analyze, anything that's going to help you find it later. Okay, so I'm going to go, and for right now I am going to work. Let's start off with the blemishes, and this is close that. This is a good way to do it. So now you can see, using the black and white adjustment layer, removing the red channel, you see a lot of the things that you're not going to really pick up with just the color, and we'll do that adjustment later with highlights and dodging and burning. Alright, so let's go back. We're going to go scroll down, go to the retouch layer, and we're going to go ahead, actually, alright, now we're going to go with the texture. Now you want to go with you want to do the mouse, or sorry, the healing brush, and you want to use a relatively smaller brush size. You can adjust that with the brackets, left and right brackets. In this case, the pen pressure, because I am using a Wacom tablet. And what I like to do too is reduce the brush size so you don't pick up so much of the area around it. Even though you're using a pretty small brush, you don't necessarily always have to pick up everything around it. So I find that this works really well. The hardness, you really want to keep that down to 0 or something relatively small, and the spacing, really 1% is good. And up here, normal is fine. Alright, you want to definitely keep this on the current layer because you only want to affect all the textures on this particular layer. So what we'll do is make the brush a little bigger. You can pick up some of the area here. I'm going to start off with the forehead here. And you want to sample around the area closest to the area that you're working with. Right now we're worried only about texture, not so much about tone. We'll affect that later. And using the Wacom tablet, obviously you can adjust the pressure and get in there really close. And I will go ahead and start showing you as we progress the layers before and after, and that will really help you understand the benefit of what we're doing here. And again, we're going to do this entire tutorial without using a single commercial plug-in or filter. These are all filters that are readily available right out the box when you buy Photoshop. And bear with me a second, we're going to go ahead. This does take a little while. Now you want to get this done right. You don't want to rush through it. You want to really get in there with the detail and see what you're doing. And in this case, again, just blemishes, not the tonality, as there might appear to be here. And this is with the black and white channel adjustment layer. And we'll do it before and after, before, after. Skin tone, skin texture looks fantastic. And I'm hoping the video picks up on what we're seeing here on this end on the monitor. But it looks fantastic. We didn't lose any of the details. It does not look plastic. It's a little hot over here from the original image. The photographer shot that a little hotter, but we'll fix that. And there is tone, or rather detail, beautiful detail everywhere. Texture is exactly where you want it to be. And again, we were looking at that at 200%. No one is ever going to look at a picture at 200%. 100% maybe, depending on the size of the ad. So you really want to be careful about that. We'll fix all this stuff later. Right now I'm working with the two layers that I discussed for the high frequency. get that fixed while I'm here. And it looks fantastic, I think. There's your after and before, after and before. Just touch up some things up here that kind of bothered me now. And you want to leave what I call breadcrumbs. You don't want to make it look so damn perfect that it looks awkward. You want to make it look natural but clean. Again, better the model skin, better the makeup, less time you'll be doing this, and better the image will look overall, and the more time you can get to doing other things like shooting, getting out in the field and shooting. Alright, so there we go. There we have the entire image, and always zoom out every once in a while just so you can get an overall feel for the image. And we'll do a little before, or rather after. Before, can't see anything there. Let's zoom in a little bit more. It's a good viewing distance. Let's get rid of this history palette. Alright, so there's your after, before, after, before. Now let's go ahead and address the low tones. We'll want to keep the high texture area showing here. What I'll go back to doing then is removing the black and white filter adjustment layer and using the two other ones that I created, the solarize and the saturation. Now the blotchiness is what we're going to address with this. You could see there's blotchiness here in this area here. You want to really make the tones smooth, and you can see that there's a pattern here we're going to address. A couple patterns down here I noticed even while we were doing the texture, and then of course down here you'll see a lot of the blotchiness. And what we're going to do, there's a couple different things that we could do. We could do the clone stamp tool to pick up some of the color from one area and pull it to the other. Initially I like to start off with the lasso, and I'll do a couple things here. I will do a lasso and maybe use a feather of say 15. There's a couple different ways I'll show you how to do this. You can immediately go with 15. Make sure you are selected at the low tones, and then maybe select the area that you want to address right now, and we want to go to Gaussian blur. Use a blur that's going to mix in the tones from one to the other. Preview on and off, maybe a little bit more. That's a little too much. You don't want to go to the edges and lose the detail in the edges, because you want to make a smooth gradation. You don't want to make it a noticeable difference around your lasso. For instance, if you go all the way to 97, you could see here, and that's a no-no. You definitely don't want that. You want smooth gradations. So maybe somewhere around 25, 26. Let's see what that looks like here. You could always go back and change it. Now it may not be a noticeable difference right away, but you could tell more in the using the help layers. That actually looks good. Now we could do that again. We can run a couple things here. Just circle, feather, and Gaussian blur. Select a little bit more of the area. Here's a little blotchy. You can Gaussian blur a couple times, the filter function a couple times to get it even smoother. Now, one cool thing about using this technique is if you really wanted to go in there and make some other changes, you can create a new layer, and using a brush, this is where, and I don't have it installed on this machine, this is where using one of those skin brushes would really come in handy. Get rid of the history palette. And what we could do is go to the brushes palette. Shape dynamic is good if we're using a Wacom tablet. And you want to go to transfer. Yep. Pen pressure. Pen pressure. And you know, do color. If you want to start touching up some of the color here, change this to the color mode. Go to, make sure obviously it's your brush. Low opacity, and again you could build up to it. And selecting the area, and you'll notice how often I go to the area to change the color of the brush. You don't want to just stick with one solid color and make it look flat. You really want to highlight some of the, select some of the highlights and some of the colors and really enhance that. And this is what we're doing with this. The benefit of using this kind of technique is that you can use a different layer for coloring. Basically, it's almost the same thing as clone stamping the areas from the brush here. Oh, there's a little spot that I noticed that now that I didn't pick up. You can see that. That is actually something we want to smooth out, so we did that. So using a different layer, you're basically picking up the colors that you want to use, and when you clip it to the layer beneath it, you can actually fill in whatever's not there. There we go, and there's a little something like this. I would go back to using the blur, oops, motion blur, and kind of following the grain. There we go. And again, dust and scratches keeps those nice edges, where if I used Gaussian blur for that particular area, a lot of those areas that we're picking up and editing would be contaminated with the surrounding pixels. Oops. There we go. Alright, let's see. It's pretty smooth there, and it's exactly what we wanted to do originally. And we just kind of create, oops, Z, because I should be using, aha, blur, my fault. Even I can make an error. Thank goodness. There is the history palette. D. Originally, that's why we were looking for a pixel radius for the dust and scratches, so we can actually create that smoothness that this particular layer affords us. And of course, we're going in here and making these edits to perfect what we're doing. It's a multi-step process. There's no quick fix. Alright, and maybe go in here, and if you see anything that's standing out, maybe some of this color up here, option, brush, small brush, build on it, smooth out the tonal ranges on the hair, and we're just affecting only color and tones. The doing it this way really keeps the color in place, and also keeping the high texture with the details, not even touching them. You can see the major difference that we've already made to this picture, and I'll probably, because I am a geek, go back and touch up some of the other texture. Now, I think we are good for our next feature, which will be in our next video for dodging and burning. The high texture aspect of this edit, I think, has been complete, and again, I'm fully aware that there are 100 different ways to get the same results in Photoshop. This is just one way. I hope that you could benefit from it. We'll do the before and after just so you can see. And there are many different ways, including some commercial filters if you want to spend the money. You don't have to. All of this was done with exactly that comes out of the box when you download and buy Photoshop. There is your after. Here's your before. Zoom out a little bit so you can see. There is your after, before, and you can see all the detail was kept in the skin. Looks fantastic. If we printed this right now, you would still see pores, would still see detail, would still see texture, would even still see fine hairs, and we'll go over that in the next video. We'll do the lips and everything else around the next video. My concern was teaching you how to use the frequency separation, and again, there's pores and what I call breadcrumbs, so it's not absolutely perfect. There's a couple things here that could either be addressed or not addressed, depending again on what the image is being used for and your level of patience. But ultimately, you can see this is what we started with. A lot of blemishes here. This is what we ended with. Now if we go back to using the helps palette, we can see again, close this up, after. You can see a lot more of the blemishes and the imperfections in the skin using those help layers. After, before, after, and again, a lot of this other detail I will address in the next video. That should be up in a couple days. I'll work obviously with the same image. Alright, so if you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment. Hope you could take something from this, and check me out on Facebook at facebook.com/954photos, PHOTOS.